Hey there, welcome to day 11. In this one, we're going to talk about classes and state. So to do this, I want to actually illustrate the challenges that we face with just a single function and why you might want to do classes. So I'm going to jump into my code for day 9 and specifically the send email function. Now, of course, if you don't have that code, just go to our 30 days of Python repo on GitHub and navigate to day 9 and go on send mail there. So I'm going to close down the Explorer and just take a look at this real quick. And what we see in the send mail function is several aspects of this that might be able to be broken up into other functions, right? For example, formulating the actual message and or attaching the HTML parts. And then maybe even running the send based off of what that message is. Those are a couple things that potentially could be in other functions. But that's not technically needed for a class. What you want to think about with classes is maintaining the state of that class. Let's say, for instance, our 2 emails here. If I want to actually clean them, make sure that they are all valid emails, what I would need to do is run a method on them to validate whether or not those emails are, or just take out the ones that aren't actually emails, even if something as simple as having an @ sign inside of it. To do that, I want to have a class that sort of maintains and understands that these 2 emails may change over time. Now, of course, this is not the only reason to use classes is to maintain state, but it often cleans up your application in a way that just makes it a lot more usable, readable, and reusable. So let's go ahead and start creating our day 11. Inside of my project here, I'm going to go ahead and make a new directory and I'm going to call it day 11. Now, before I actually start coding anything, I want to jump into the Python shell. Now in VS Code, if we hit Control tilde, that's that squiggly line in the top left of your keyboard, it will actually open up a terminal window like this or a PowerShell if you're on Windows. So I'm going to go ahead and close down this Explorer here by clicking on that icon there for the files just to give me a little bit more room, and then this up arrow right here to just fill that all the way up. And I'll go ahead and do Python 3, and here we go. We're now in that same Python shell that we've been working in, like in the terminal. But now I don't have to actually flip back and forth between VS Code and the terminal window. I can just bring that down and close it down, actually with hitting Control tilde, and that will close it and open it. Okay, cool. So now what we want to do is use a class. Now to use a class, it's really simple. We just type out class, the name of the class, typically in animal case, so or camel case rather. So you're going to say class animal is cool, something like that. That's how you're going to write out a class. You can put parentheses in there or not. And then I'm just going to define one function called hello, and it's going to take an argument of self, which I'll explain in a moment, and we'll go ahead and print out hello. Okay, so we've defined our first class. Now, how do we actually use this class? Well, similar to functions, we actually have to call the class first, and then we call the methods on it. So in other words, I'll go ahead and say obj equals to animal is cool with parentheses there, and then obj.hello, and also parentheses because it's a function. So it prints out hello. And that's a class. Really simple. But what we want to know about classes is how they control state. This is where it gets a little bit more complicated. So let's go ahead and go back into the Explorer, into day 11. I'm going to make a new file in here, and I'm going to call it animals.py. And I'm just going to lower down the terminal just a little bit, not too much. And then I'll close out the Explorer, or toggle the Explorer. And we'll go ahead and define our class again. And yet again, I'll use the similar sort of method that I did with animals cool by just copying it, and we need to get rid of some of those dots there. Okay, and I'll just call this animal, and we'll go ahead and say noise, or rather make noise. So this doesn't do a whole lot yet, right? What classes do really well is they allow you to attach state-like items to them, or a little bit better understanding about that particular class. So in other words, I can go here and say noise equals to rar, or something like that, right? So this noise, this is a variable attached to a class. When you do something like this, that means that this is now a property of that class. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to exit out of this terminal here, and I'm going to navigate into day 11. And I should see animals in there. So I'll do python-i animals.py. And now I should have the animal class already imported. I should be able to use the animal class, but I don't. So that means I didn't save probably. So I'll go ahead and save this file. And I use Command S to do that really quickly, or Control S if you're on Windows. And let's go ahead and exit out of here and try that again. And this time I'm going to type out animal. And now I should have this reference to the class. Okay, great. So what we need to do is we need to initialize the class or instantiate the class to make a brand new instance of that class. That sounds like mumbo jumbo to me. So basically what we're saying here is we need to copy or create something from this class. So we're going to go ahead and say object equals to animal, and much like functions, we have to actually call it. So this initializes it or instantiates it. This essentially calls that class and creates a new instance of that class and sets it equal to this variable here. So now that I've got that, I hit obj. Notice that there is a slight difference. This is showing me that it's now an instance of the animal class, where this was just the animal class. So noise itself, I can use what's called dot notation to actually grab it. So obj dot noise. Now, this might not look that odd to you at this point. We used Python requests where we were doing stuff like requests.get, right? That is dot notation. Now, it doesn't always mean that you're using a Python class. It could mean a number of things, but in this case, I can access various attributes of the animal class based off of that dot notation. I can also access methods or functions of that class. So make noise, just like that. And what this self is doing is it's referencing the current instance of that class, right? So in other words, if I were to try and grab whatever the noise that this current animal is making, I want to be able to reference it. So that means in here, let's go back in here. That was probably a little confusing. So let's go back in here. I'm going to clear everything out. And I'm going to come into make noise, and instead of printing hello, I'm going to print out self.noise using string substitution. Now self.noise is going to be fairly obvious in just a moment. So we'll save this. I'll go back into the interactive shell there. I need to make sure I'm using Python 3. Otherwise I'll get syntax errors because Python 2 does not allow for that kind of string substitution. And obviously we want to use Python 3 anyway. Okay, so now that we've got that, I'm going to go ahead and type out animal. There it is. So I'm going to make an instance of it. So I'll say object equals to, or obj equals to animal. And now again, I can use this dot notation of noise. Goes rer, obj dot make noise. Okay, rar. No big deal here. So this self.noise is sort of replacing this obj. So by default with classes, when you want to use methods in there, you have to have noise or that self instance object reference to it. Now, if you're coming from JavaScript, that's similar to this. It's the same idea. It's like it's going to reference its own instance that's created. Now, if you did animal.make_noise and hit enter, this is when you get something like this. You get it's missing a positional argument of self. Now the reason for that is because I didn't actually initialize animal here. In order for that to work, you have to initialize animal and make noise. In other words, you have to make an instance of animal and then hit make noise. So that also means that in classes, if I just wanted to have a method attached to the class, I'll go ahead and call this rando and then hit let's just go ahead and print this. I'll hit exit, run that again. Now if I did animal.rando, I get the actual call that's happening. But this kind of defeats the purpose of using a class altogether. Using self makes a lot more sense because now I can reference state items about that particular animal. Now, when I say state, it means that it can change. So let's go ahead and say define set noise. and we'll say self, and then we'll do a new noise. And what this means is that I will set some sort of argument or parameter that I have inside of animal, and I'll go ahead and say self.noise equals to new noise, and then we'll return, or just do nothing. I'm just going to leave the return statement out for a moment. So now that we've got that, let's exit out of this shell, run it again, and do obj equals to animal, and then obj.noise, rar. So obj.set noise, and go, And now obj.make noise, So there you go. That is, at its core, what classes allow us to do. I changed the state of this particular instance. This is even more clear if I make another instance. So if I do animal again and do animal.make noise, I still have that original data or that original state from the base class, right, of rar. And even more is true if I did abc.set noise and went another noise and went abc.make noise. I see that it's just another noise. If I do obj.make noise, it's still that original state from there, right? So state can change over time, and a class keeps it all nice and contained so we can grab the various attributes of it or properties of it, and we can also run functions or methods on it to do all sorts of things. In this case, what I did here was called a getter and a setter. So realistically, a lot of times in classes, what you'll see is like define get noise or get whatever the property is, right? And it's going to return self, and then it would return that actual property. And then another one is set noise, like we already did. And then same thing, we would set it based off of some new value, like we already did. And then we would return self.noise. And this should be like that. Now this would also be true with like color, right? So if we said red, you would essentially duplicate these if you wanted to be able to reset them from get noise to get color. And you can use color and then set color, new color, and there we go. Okay, so this argument can be simply color, but I'm just putting it as new color, so if you reference it later, it still makes a lot of sense. Okay, so there's one more aspect of classes that make them very, very powerful, and that is inheritance. So if I use animal and I want to come down here and say class wolf, I can pass in that original animal class, and I can also set the noise as grrr, right? Okay, so let's set that. I'm going to exit out of the shell, clear everything. Python 3 animals, make sure I've saved everything. I think I have, and I can check this by just typing wolf. Okay, so I do have that wolf class in there. And I'll go ahead and say a equals to wolf, and then a.make noise, and hit enter. Grrr. Wait a minute, I didn't declare anything on here. What's going on? Well, what it does is it takes all of these methods, all of those default methods, and it brings everything down to the class that it's inheriting from. Think of this as I just wrote it, right? So a wolf likely makes noise, and a wolf likely has color, or pretty much any animal likely makes noise and likely has some sort of color, right? So that's what's happening here, is it's inheriting all of the properties and methods down into this class. And so I can also say a.get color, and it will give me some color. Obviously a wolf is, well, I guess there are red wolves, but by and large they're probably like more of a brown color or a white color. So that is something that you can start to add these various attributes to this animal to start to get more accurate representation of what that animal would be in this class term. Now I'm just doing this to illustrate a point as to why we would end up using something like this in our projects. And we'll get into more practical examples in just a little bit. But the idea is that we define a class. That class can inherit from other classes, and it can inherit again from other classes. Let's say, for instance, like we wanted to say even further down, we could do class baby wolf, and we do wolf. And this time I'm just going to say color equals to white or yellow or whatever I want to. Okay. And then going back in here, yet again, I've got baby wolf there. We initialize it, obj.make noise. And not only does it do gur, as in the wolf itself, but it also has the function of make noise. I can also do get color, and it has the color of yellow, right? So that is where inheritance becomes really, really valuable. It can stack multiple layers. These are layers of abstraction that make building programs a lot more robust. So in general, we can also have other functions on here, other methods that make our base class, or the one that everything else inherits from, much more effective as well. So the reason I'm doing this has to do with how we're going to be doing emailing. So what I want to do is have an email class and a template class, so I can render out any given template for any given email and also do various things in there as well. So let's go ahead and do that now. So in the day 11 directory, let's go ahead and create a new file here. I'm going to call it templates.py. And in here, we're going to create a class. We'll call it our template class. And I just wanted to do a couple things. One is going to be get template, and it's going to take in self, and that will return the actual template string. And then the other one is going to be render, and that's going to render out any given context that I pass to it. Now, one of the things that I didn't mention in the earlier part is this init method. So I can actually do something like this, which is called when we actually initialize it. So in other words, if I just printed out hello there, we'll see hello there as soon as I initialize this class. Let's take a look at that. So I'm going to go ahead and do Control tilde to open up that terminal. I'm also going to close down the Explorer for a moment, or toggle it at least. And then inside of that day 11, I'm going to go ahead and do Python 3-i templates.py. And now if I do template, initialize it, it actually prints out hello there. Okay. So this init method is something that you will do from time to time to add things. Now the good thing about it for us is we can actually add our arguments into this template itself. So in other words, I can say something like template name equals to that, and then context equals to some sort of empty dictionary. Okay. And so with that, I would then come inside of this init function to self.template name equals to the template name, and then self.context equals to context. Okay. And these defaults I can also pass on to the class itself, in the sense that it would be something like this. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at that again. Let's exit out of this, go into there, and we'll just do template, and then template name equals to, let's say, hello.txt, and context equals to the dictionary, let's say name Justin. Close that off, hit enter. That actually gives me that object, so let's put it equal to something. So I'll put it equal to the object variable here. And now if I do obj.context, I see that's my context, so it's a dictionary I can use. And obj.template name also does that as well. Okay, so that's the init function. So now let's go ahead and actually create a template. So we're going to make a txt file, or a text file, that I'm going to render using a lot of things we've already learned. So let's go ahead and open up that Explorer again, and inside of day 11, I'll go ahead and create a new folder in here, and I'm going to call this templates with the lowercase template. And inside of templates.py, or actually also inside of this folder, we're going to make a file called hello.txt, and I'll just say hello name. Okay, so I'll save that txt file, I'll close it, and now back into templates.py, let's close that Explorer window, and I'll go ahead and import OS. And I want to get the file path, or this current file path. So os path.absolute path of the file, just like that. And then the base dir, os path.dir name of that file path. Now let's remember back to what that means is it's looking for the absolute file path where it is on my system for templates.py. And then it's looking for the base directory as in day 11. And this will work on your system or pretty much any system as long as Python's installed. Okay, so the next thing is then the template dir, and we want to set this equal to os path.join base dir, and let's get rid of that, and then templates. Okay, so that's our template directory. So now in this get template method, what we need to do is grab that template path. So I'll say template path equals to os path.join, and it's going to join the template directory with whatever we set as our template name in the init function. So we'll come in here and do comma self.template name. So self.template name will mean that it's going to reference something in here. Now, what I will say is if not os path.exists of the template path, then what I'll do is I will raise what's called an exception. So I'll say raise exception, and I'll say this path does not exist. So this will stop it in its tracks. So as soon as I call get template, it will say, this is not allowed because that template path does not exist. Otherwise, I'm actually going to grab the string. So we'll say template string equals to first an empty string, and then we'll go ahead and open up that path and set it equal to that empty string like we've did in day 9. So let's go ahead and grab that path, open, and then we'll read it as a file object, which we'll declare as just f. And then we'll say template string equals to f.read. And then we are going to return that template string. Okay, so render could be a couple things. First of all, render, I could pass in context here as well, like some other methods are available. Or you could pass it in from self.context. So what I'm actually going to do is say context is none for this template and also none. So the default of context is none. So that way down here I could say render ctx is equal to just an empty. We'll say if self.context is not equal to none, then self.context equals to, or rather not self.context, but render context is equal to that self.context. And same thing with this right here is I'll go ahead and say none, and we'll then say else render context equals to context. Okay, and then finally I'll just do one more step, render ctx if it's not a dictionary. So if not is instance render context of a dictionary, then we will say render ctx equals to a dictionary, just like that. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab the template string from that method. So we'll say template string equals to self.getTemplate. And then finally, we will render this out with the template string format. And we'll do something called unpacking a dictionary, which is putting 2 stars here and render ctx. So what that does is takes a dictionary like this. Let's say, for instance, it's name and Justin. That turns it into keyword arguments where it's name equals to Justin inside of a functional call, which is pretty cool. So it makes actually rendering this out possible. And now our render method has the ability to change context within that render method, which is pretty nice. So let's go ahead and try out this new class. I'll go ahead and exit out of here, and we'll go into day 11 and python-i templates.py. I'm gonna close down the Explorer window here and just bring this up a little bit. Okay, and so what I want to do is grab the template. We need to initialize the template, at least with template name. And that one was hello.txt. And then I will actually add in the context and say name. Name is Justin. Close off that context and the parentheses. That was a peculiar bug. I don't know why that happened. Let's try that again. And I'll just say template equals to that. And now just template.render. Hit enter. And what do you know? It says hello, Justin. And of course, if I change the context in here, we can see if that works as well. Still going off of hello, Justin, so I'd have to do template.context equals to none, and then do that context. There we go. So by default, it's going to go off of whatever it initializes with, which is cool. In fact, I'm going to just reverse the order of that just a little bit and come down here and say we want to use the render context being whatever that is. Just like that. Get rid of that if clause. So that means that the local function has the context that we're wanting. Okay, so without actually closing Python, let's see if I can change the file. Hello there. This is cool. Save hello.txt and render that context again. And what do you know? It's actually giving me that newly rendered context. So I don't have to go into Python to change what that template is for any given template type email. So that's cool. So now that we have this, we need to actually create the class for sending our emails. All right, so now what we're going to do is grab the send mail method that I did before and just bring this in because we just need to change a few things about it. So naturally, you're going to want to set up your password and all that. And then now I've got this send mail function in here that's still going to be similar. We're just going to turn it into a class so we can have just a better idea of how we want to go about doing this. So I'm going to go ahead and say class, and this is going to be emailer. And we're going to just, first off, initialize it. And we're going to set text subject. Well, should we be doing text? Well, the answer is no. What we should actually be doing is the template name. We can leave the subject in there. Let's go ahead and put that first. And also the template context. And then we can also say template, like template HTML. And I'll set that equal to none. So if there's two different templates, like if you wanted a plain text template as well as an HTML template, that's how you would do it. We could also say template name equals to none as well. So let's just try that out. Template name equals to none. And I'll even put the context as an empty dictionary. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because, well, basically I just want to make sure that if template name equals to none and template name HTML equals to none, then I'll just go ahead and raise an exception just for those. Raise exception. Say you must set a template. Okay. So with this, that means that I should be able to render out what the template is. So I'm actually going to tab in the original send email function that I had before. Tab the entire thing in. This is going to be a lot easier to see if I close down this Explorer here. Okay, so this is word wrapped. That's okay. The assert part, well, let's think about how we actually want this send mail to go. Well, first of all, I probably want to have the 2 emails in this init method as well. And again, I want to set it equal to none. And that's actually where I need to assert that it's a list. Otherwise, it will raise its own exception right here. And so that means that down here, I'll go ahead and say 2 emails equals to an empty list. And I'll go ahead and set self.2emails equals to the new past 2 emails. The from email, I certainly can set this as an argument inside of the init method if I'd like, but in my case, this is the only email I'm going to be sending from, so not too worried about that. So the next few things, well, do I have a subject? I have got my subject right here. And yet again, I'll set this equal to an empty string and just put self.subject equals to that subject. So again, subject equals to, I'll leave it in as an empty string, or you could say something like hello world. Won't matter because once we initialize it, it's going to change it. So you could even leave it in as none or not even there. Okay, and then the context and template name. We can also put those things in here, or we could render them out in the init function too, which I'm not going to do just yet. But instead, we're just looking at this send mail part. HTML, well, we'll go ahead and say if template HTML is not equal to none, then we'll say has HTML equals to true. Rather, self.has HTML equals to true. Otherwise, I'm going to set it equal to false by default on this class. Okay. And then let's go ahead and go back into the send mail. My text, again, is going to be rendered out context that I had before. Subject is now attached to the class itself. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this into self. Now, I could certainly make this its own method, and perhaps I should, like format MSG, self as in format message. And so all of these items would actually come in and return back to the sendMail method itself so that it's focused on its own thing. Now, first and foremost, we need that from email, which is on my self call. So I can say self.fromEmail, self.toEmails, self.subject. And then these parts aren't able to be rendered just yet. So I'll just comment them out with command /. And now down here, MSG equals to self.formatMessage. Okay. And then this is our server method, and we could potentially just leave that in there. But what I want to do is change this just a little bit. Instead of having quit there, I'm going to use that with statement like we mentioned before. And that's for the session itself, but also so that my try block could be in here. So I'm going to go ahead and say did send equals to false. And then we'll do with and all of this as server. And then just these blocks here. Tab them in, get rid of the open and quit. There we go. And I'm actually going to put this into a try block, the actual send mail into a try block, and then accept pass, or rather accept did send equals to false. And above this, we'll say did send equals to true. Now, I'm not actually checking the exceptions that are coming through. So this is a way to catch exceptions if you're not familiar with that. And then finally, this method will just return did send. Okay, so let's go ahead and render out the HTML text if there is some. So first of all, the self.template name. So we'll say if self.template name is not equal to none, I believe that's what we passed it in as, then we will use the template class. So template string equals to, well, that template class that we just created. So let's go ahead and open that Explorer up. We need to import it from templates. So we'll do from templates, import template. Okay, so that template class. And just as a refresher of what we need to do there, we need to pass in the template name and the context that we're using. So back into that sendmail.py. So template name being self.templateName and context being self.context. And now we will attach this to our message with memtype text or memtext. The txt itself will be template string.render. Again, I'm already passing the context in the template itself, so it should actually render it as such. The next thing is almost identical to this block, except instead of its template name, it's template HTML. And then we change the template name here and change this from plain to HTML. And then this is going to be the HTML part, and we will attach that accordingly. Okay, so this should actually be everything that we need to do to actually call this class and send the emailer as such. Now, I'm not going to actually set up my credentials for this to verify to work. So what I'm going to do then also is say something like send or test send equals to false, and allow an argument to be test send equaling to true, so that when I actually run this, I can just do a test send, say self.testSend equals to test send, and then that means that down here with this then send, I'll just go ahead and say if not self.testSend, then I'll go ahead and run all of that. And I'll leave did send up here, right there. And in this case, I'm also going to just go ahead and print out the rendered template strings. So let's go ahead and print the parts out. So I'll print out HTML part. And TXT part. Okay. Good. So now let's go ahead and take a look. Python 3-i send mail.py. Okay, so emailer. What are the arguments we need? Well, we need the subject, and I'll say subject equals to hello world. The context, and in this case, name Justin. And then the template name equaling to hello.txt. Close that off. I think I also need 2 emails, and I'll just do hungrypie@gmail.com. Okay, so that should set up that class, or the instance of that class rather. We say obj equals to that, and then obj dot send email. I think that's what we called it. We probably should just call it send or send mail. I'll just call it send from going forward. But for now, since I have this session open still, I'll hit send mail. And it's giving me emailer has no attribute template name. So that's probably something like this. And perhaps I didn't actually set it. Yep, looks like I didn't set it in here. So I need to also set this and say self.template HTML equals to the argument of template HTML, and self.template name equals template name, the past template name. Okay, let's try that again. Exit out of here. And I'm going to just press up a couple times to get that emailer object again. Obj dot I'm also going to say obj dot test send equals to true, and then obj dot send. And I didn't set the context either. Okay, so this is why we test things. Self.context equals to context. And I thought that I had an empty context up here. I guess I do not. So I'm going to set empty context up here as well. Okay, let's exit out and try it again. Maybe this time it'll work. Okay, and this time I'm also going to pass in here the test send being true. And now obj.send, we hit enter. And there we go. We've got another attribute problem. Template HTML does not have an attribute. Oh, of course, it's not up here either. Okay, so template HTML equals to none. Template name equals to none as well. Okay, so why is it that I had to do that? Well, when we access other parameters or properties inside of a class that we may or may not have set, we definitely want to make sure that it is set. So in other words, let's, I'm just going to close these down for just a second. So in our init call right here, we have all of these arguments that are coming through. These arguments can be named whatever you want them to. And then I set them down here. Now notice before I didn't have template HTML set. This part was only set if template HTML was not none. But what I did down here inside of the format message is I actually referenced those things, even though they're not technically properties of this emailer. Like I didn't actually have them on here, which is why that we are running into that little error. So in other words, setting default values is often a really good practice when your later functions use those default values, even if they're meant to be none. Like in this case, if it wasn't meant to be none, then it we wouldn't have to use it. Okay, so let's try that one more time. This time I think it'll work. Let's press up a couple more times. Here's our emailer class. We're initializing it with all that stuff. And now obj.send. And it did not send. No surprise there. But it is showing me the text version, which is right here, right? That's pretty cool. It did not send because I am not logged in. And also I said did send equals to false. So if I press up again and say test send false and obj.send, this time it'll give me a login error, most likely. And that's what it did. Authentication error, which is no surprise there. Those are ones that I still want to see if I'm trying this out. I want to make sure that, oh, what's going on here? Now, more than likely, you'd probably want to see what this error is as well. But that try block could be 100% improved. It's just we're not wanting to focus too much of that right now. Okay, so with all this made, let's go ahead and just do one more thing, and that is creating a HTML template. So I'll go ahead and say hello.html, and I'm just going to take hello.txt, pass this in here, and I'm just going to wrap these things in paragraph tags, just like this. That way we can just see what potentially would be sent, assuming that we did this correctly. Now, I didn't actually exit out of the Python shell, and that's critical here. So I'm going to close the Explorer again. I'm going to open this up a little bit, press up a few times, and I'm also going to pass in template HTML equals to hello.html. I hit enter, and this should be obj.send. And what I will see is here's the HTML that's going to be sent with all of the content type and related mem stuff. And then here is the text content type that would actually be able to send all of the text stuff. Cool. Okay, so now let's just do a little recap here. I'm going to zoom out on this just so we can just see this class a little bit better from a high level. Now the idea is we set a class. We set various attributes to that class, default attributes if we need them in any of the methods. The init method will declare or change a lot of these attributes potentially, or it will add some if it needs to. The init method could also render things, like it could have ran another class and attached that class in here as well. It didn't have to do it the way we did. The next thing is we ran another method. This method just kind of removed it from that main one send method. And realistically, we'd probably even break out the send method itself to something different, potentially. But now we have 3 different methods on here. One's the initializer class method. So this is a lot closer to being something that is ready to work into production, into an application. Now, how we had it before is certainly okay, but this is now very convenient because all I'll need to do is reference the actual template I'm using and whatever subject I wanted to do. Now, of course, you could make the subject its own template as well. So you could render whatever that subject string would be as its own template as well. Or you could go even further and make a base email class being that it would do the stuff like format message and send, and then your emailer class or your template emailer class would then just do all the template related things in conjunction with actually sending out that email. That is a little bit more complex than what we're going to cover here, but hopefully this concept of classes is starting to fit into where you might use it in the future, right? So templates, this one I think was a very obvious one. We will change template names, we'll change context, and you can do that on the fly. And that's where classes really shine, is handling whatever that state is. Send mail class is not a whole lot different, although sending email in general can get a little complicated. So rendering the template inside of one function would be a lot to do. Doing it inside of a class breaks that part out and actually turns it into something that's a little bit more robust. Now, this format message part here, these if statements themselves potentially could be their own HTML parts. They could be their own methods that are broken out from this format message and called inside of this init message. That is another thing that you absolutely could consider doing. So I realized that we went through a lot here as far as putting something real into classes. But what we did at the very beginning is still the fundamental truth about all of these classes. And what you'll see a lot of Python applications is they use these classes, but they use them even smaller than I did here. Like this is a fairly full class. Breaking it up might make your code more readable and easier to fix if it comes to it. Or in the case of this emailer, you might need to email a lot of times. So it might make a lot of sense to try and break out how this whole function works to being it's a separate class in of itself, just doing the sending portion, or the actual sending portion could still use that old function. Even just looking at that old function, you can see that you could still use all of these same things and just call this function inside of our sendMail class. You don't actually have to redo all of the SMTP and all the server sending things inside of this function either. In fact, you wouldn't want to repeat yourself over and over there to get to that point. So you might even keep it as its own function because every once in a while you have a string that's coming through. So the real point of this emailer class was to combine the formatting of HTML or text and then send it, not actually doing the sending part. So that's something else to think about. Now, this is one of the challenging things and exciting things about programming is you run into all of these ideas on how to improve any given function or any given class. And we could spend a lot more time doing that here. My goal with this for you is to see something real that you could actually use now, and then in the future, once you get better at Python, you could come back and start to improve these things with all the suggestions that I just mentioned. I would not say this is a great class per se, but it is a very useful one, right? So like really good programmers would come back and just tear this apart and make it much better, but that's not the point here. The point is to get something real done using classes because they are more robust features of building an entire application. Functions are great for a lot of things too. So don't think that functions don't play their role as well. They certainly do. Anyways, thanks so much for watching day 11, and I hope to see you in day 12.